Future Now Show. Brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam.
Welcome, Saro, to the Future Now Show. It's great to have you here, especially since I also had some encounters and experiences with Mediamatic, a very interesting creative place in Amsterdam, focusing on biology, food, and art, of course.
I started with Mediamatic in like 2009, being involved with a lot of technical functions. And then back in 2012, they started with Aquaponics. First volunteers, we just came together and basically just started building a system. And then Mediamatic just provided food. I got so involved that very quickly every Sunday I started being at Mediamatic. So as well as the weekdays, I also worked there in the weekends because Aquaponics connected with me. It gave me a tool to grow your own food, to think about food production, which I was not very familiar with back then. And after a few years, Mediamatic felt like, hey, we have all these aquaponic systems now. So then we started to give workshops because we wanted to share what we learned during the years. And after a while, I started giving these workshops myself. And now we're, I think, like 10 years later, I'm still giving the workshops. And I started to build my own system on a piece of land that we rent from a friend of ours. Well, that's nice. I prepared a small presentation for the channel as a contribution, explaining very briefly on what aquaponics is and why we should do it, and a little bit on how we can do it. A little bit about my background besides Mediamatic. I come from a design background. So also with aquaponics, I like to see it as a design challenge. How can we optimize it, designing it in such a way that it's well functioning. I also did a course in permaculture design. So a lot of the things I learned there, I try to connect with designing food systems as well as an aquaponic system. Here you can see the aquaponic cycle. The aquaponic cycle is based on the natural nitrogen cycle. This cycle is where nitrogen is constantly recycled around. You have animals, in this case fish, that are eating and excreting ammonia. Ammonia is a form of nitrogen. This nitrogen is used by bacteria to grow on, and the bacteria, they excrete from this ammonia, they excrete nitrite, and in a second step other bacteria make from this nitrite, they make nitrate, and nitrate is one of the NPKs, and that means that it's used a lot by the plants. So the nitrogen is covered by this cycle, and aquaponics is born. Aquaponics is a system that combines hydroculture with aquaculture. Hydroculture is a plant growing technique that is without soil, a soilless system, so to say. This is for the purpose that if you want to connect all these different elements, the fish, the plants, and the bacteria, you need the elements to flow freely within the system. So if you would have soil in the system, the water would just stand in the soil and you just have a wet blob. To prevent this, you either grow the plants directly in a basin of water, or you grow the plants in rocks where the water can flow in between the rocks. These are our small fingerlings. Aquaculture, the growing of fish in captivity. It has an output which is waste. You have the shit of the fish and the ammonia excreted by the fish. This waste stream we want to recycle and reuse. This is where the nitrogen cycle comes in. We pump the waste of the fish through rocks, and on the rocks are bacteria living, and these bacteria, with a combination of air and the oxygen that is in the air, will make the waste available for the plants to take up as nitrates. And by taking it up, they filter the water. So the fish are replenished with fresh water because of the plants and the bacteria, and the plants are provided by nutrients by the fish. This is an infographic from the energy work group that shows how oil production is in the world. The thing I want to explain here is that oil is a finite resource, and nowadays a lot of our agricultural systems are based on the cheap availability of fossil fuels, as well as the machinery to work the land, as the nutrients that are produced by the natural gas, the synthesized nitrogen I'm talking about, and the transportation of the foods. Nowadays, people are more and more living in urban areas. It means that our cities grow bigger, and the food has to come from further away. And this means more transportation. And as long as this transportation is based on fossil fuels, it means a lot of traffic in the city and a lot of pollution as well. Water withdrawal worldwide, due to the FAO, agriculture is one of the heaviest consumers of water. That's why we have to look at a different solution by recycling this water. So aquaponics is a system where we recycle the water over and over again. So the water from the fish is pumped to the plants, and then from the plants it goes back to the fish. And this is a continuous cycle. How are we going to do a better system design? I want to look at my environment as a network. So a network has inputs and outputs. It has relations between elements. And by looking at it as such, in such a way, we can start looking at connections and improving relationships. For example, if you look at an orchard where you have apple trees, you might have a compost heap. And this compost heap has as input food scraps. And then you connect the compost with the tree by providing it nutrients this way. And then the output of the tree might be apples. And then you have other elements, like you have your beehive with bees, and the bees pollinate the apple tree, and you get honey from the bees. So aquaponics, we look a bit like this. The aquaponic cycle again. Here we have the different elements, the fish, the bacteria in the grow bed, and we have the plants. And they have different functions, and they have relations to each other. And we use in an aquaponic system, we use water as a connector between these relations. How this might physically look. It's an infographic of an aquaponic system, where we have the fish sitting in a container in the bottom, where they are fed by food. This can be an input. And this the fish, they digest it and they excrete ammonia and they shit in the water. And then the water with this waste is being pumped through the grow beds. In the grow beds, the bacteria live in between the rocks, and they make it available for the plants. So the next step is that the plants take up the nutrients, and in the bottom, the last grow bed will drain back into the fish tank and will replenish the water with water tank with fresh water. So For fish food, you can use commercial food as an input, but this is of course an input that you cannot control. So you can also design your own system, making the cycle even more closed. This you can do by growing your own maggots or worms in a worm farm. So you are able to reuse your food scraps that you have from your aquaponics and transform it back into a food for the fish. So by making it more interconnected, you will have a more sustainable system because you don't have to transport it. You can just reuse your own waste to produce more food for the fish and for the plants. If you want to do it without fish, it's also possible. You can look at different input sources, for instance, your own urine as a nitrogen source, or you can use the compost tea from your compost heap. For instance, a worm farm or a maggot farm has fluids draining from the compost, and you can add those to provide nitrogen for your system. This is a picture of the system that we have now at Mediamatic. The system is built of recycled containers from the food industry. Here you see grow beds piled on top of each other with LED lights hanging above them to provide sufficient light for the lower layers. With an aquaponics system, you have to sometimes measure and control. This means that you want to analyze the water, see how the quality is of the water, as well as for the fish, the bacteria, and the plants. The plants need sufficient nutrients, so you want to measure all the elements that the plant needs. And you want to measure the pH in terms for the uptake of the nutrients and the fish and the bacteria. pH is one of the most important factors in this aquatic environment. It's important for the uptake of the nutrients by the plants, as well as the well-being of the bacteria and the fish. In our aquaponics system, you make a compromise between 6 and 7 to have to keep everyone happy, basically. Naturally, the pH will drop lower and lower, and after a while, when it's going below 6, you want to counter this by adding alkaline minerals. So we add calcium and potassium to bring up the pH. Typically in an aquaponics system, you will have plenty of harvest because there's an abundance of nutrients and water for the plants. You can expect it to grow much faster than in a typical soil system. And it's more versatile that you can design it in a way that you want, because you can do layers, or you can do hanging pots, for instance. Here you can see a system that is built with milk bottles. It's just an example to show how you can reuse different materials. Also because we often give workshops to consumers that want ways to build their system at home. And at home you want to start small, maybe. So milk bottles or old water bottles might be a good solution there. If you want to design a system, it's good to look for natural local resources. So instead of, for instance, baked clay pebbles as a grow medium or rock wool, you can also look at what are rocks in my local vicinity. Maybe you live on a volcanic island, then volcanic rock might be good, or you have gravel nearby, then you can use plain gravel. And for the grow beds and the fish tanks, you can use existing containers like the milk bottles, but there's also barrels that are used to transport oil, as well as the IBC containers. So aquaponics is especially good if you live in a city and you cannot go in the soil, and there might be a scarcity of water. In general, aquaponics is a bit more complex than traditional competing systems, where you have plants growing on a ready mixed nutrient solution. This is what you see often in big scale greenhouses. So to have an aquaponics system commercially, it can be challenging to compete with that. But it gives a great tool for people to grow their own food, because it's easy to set up and it's cheap to run if you don't have to pay for the labor that comes with it. Labor, it's getting quite expensive quickly because you need more knowledge. You don't have only the plants, but you also have to take care for fish. So that makes it more complex in that sense. Do you have any questions?
So I think it's very clear story. What I'm missing is the fish. Can you talk about the fish? What kind of fish do you use?
I got the question often, like also what is the ratio of fish plants? How many fish do you need? So, like, can you have one goldfish and run all your vegetables on that? With that, you have to think on how much waste are they producing, and that you have to measure, of course. So when you feed the fish, they're gonna excrete ammonia, and this eventually is being broken down to nitrate. So the nitrate is the number that you're looking at if you're having enough fish. It's very difficult. Sometimes you hear ratios like this many fish, this many plants, but this differs a lot to how much the fish eat basically and how much waste they produce. So you have, if you're feeding your fish a lot to have optimum fish production, so you want the fish to grow as fast as possible, you're going to need obviously more plants than if you want to just have fish and you feed them less food. So that's a bit difficult. In terms of what kind of fish, you can look at what's popular is tilapia or catfish. Typically you see sweetwater fish because you want to grow maybe tomatoes or lettuces, and they just don't grow very well in salt water. And the benefit of a catfish, for instance, is that it's a nice fish to eat, obviously, because it's a nice firm meat, and you can smoke it, for instance. But it's also a fish that is doing well grown in captivity, because you can stock them quite densely, and they won't start attacking each other. Actually, with catfish, you have to have enough fish in the tank so they won't get territorial. And another benefit is that the catfish is a bit special in the way that it can get oxygen out of air. So if you might have an accident, so the pumps breaks and you didn't design it well, or some disaster happened, then the fish can still get oxygen by swallowing air into their stomach and getting oxygen this way. If you, for instance, have trout, what you also sometimes see, then you might have a problem when you're lacking oxygen.
Where do you find the aquaponic systems at the moment, most typically? Is this in food shops or restaurants?
Oh, wait, where you see it the most?
Yeah.
You have some commercial farms, like in Brussels, you have the big farm. In Anderlecht, that's one of the biggest. You have professional farms in Germany, in Berlin. And these are farms that focus at a high priced product. So you have a high quality fish, especially which is locally grown. And these products are often sold to restaurants. Mainly, you're looking at plant production, vegetables, compared to the fish. And for the rest, it's mostly people who want to learn about food growing and want to have a very optimum system themselves at home. So you see people at rooftops growing their own food with different types of containers. And then you have more the geeky section where people try to make it as much automated as possible. So they start to hook sensors to the system, measuring different values, and then automating it. So that's also a part that appeals to people, is the fact that you can control it and you can measure it, and that you can make it a bit smart in a way.
If you have, let's say, an advice to our viewers, what's the best way to go about it? Let's say you don't know anything about it, but you like the idea.
Yeah, start with buying a good book, I would say. There's a lot to find on the internet in explaining different systems, but it's also hyped a lot. So I would advise you to not start too big, so you can and build it up from there, because there's always a learning curve. No matter how much you read, you always have the factors of your own local environment. You might have different climates, different weather. You're going to do it in a greenhouse or not. So also start with not too many fish, because if you have too many fish, you have to have a better, more efficient treatment of this waste that the fish produce. And if you have buildup of waste, then you're going to get a toxic environment, and you might have fish death. So you want to start with fewer fish and then build from there. And as well, fish do grow, so you will get more kilos of waste producers over time. I would just say, just do it and try it. I think that the most beautiful about aquaponics is that a lot of traits come together and it connects us more to our food and what it means to grow food.